I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
When the future eventually arrived, its uses expanded, especially in the 80s as Wham was making it big. To quote a young wing-haired George Michael, "You can have my credit card, baby, but keep your red-hot fingers off of my heart, lady." The 1980s is, in my ear, the Plasticine era. We hear plastic in its synthesized pop melodies with longer shelf lives than we've ever imagined. After all, this was the infamous Teflon President Ronald Reagan's reign, when we became accustomed to the material and speculative excesses of plastic, of the pocket-sized variety, in an ever-increasing debt economy. From Duran Duran, wind-blown and dashing in Antony Price suits, carousing on catamarans in the azure waters of Belize, no actual resemblance to the Rio Grande and its murky, dangerously patrolled crossings, to the meteoric rise of a material girl manufactured for a material world, and Cyndi Lauper's bedazzled yop reminding us that, yes, money changes everything. The 80s and its plastic pop offered instructional moments about avarice, envy, and the many other deadly sins with which we now have to reckon, with what comes after you want it all and get it all, and grabbing hands grabbed all they can, and the only thing that counts are large amounts. Our road, this road, was paved with plastic. 80s pop, plastic pop, was also the music that welcomed me when I washed upon the shiny suburban shores of the California coast in 1983. But the plastic soundscape of the 80s offered another kind of instruction, a tutorial in how to make music without knowing how. It made us hear the something for nothing that structures what we understand economically, conceptually, and musically as debt. How then do we reconcile it? By the 1990s, we saw plastic bend a la Radiohead, like a green plastic watering can for her fake Chinese rubber plant in the fake plastic earth. At the turn of the millennium, plastic multiplied. It severed the one to make the many. Wynn Greenwood split herself in three to become Tracy and the Plastics, a performance art and sound venture in which she sings under assumed names with projected images of her alter egos, backing her up on drums and keyboards. In a 2001 essay, Greenwood explained the concept behind Tracy and the Plastics. When an individual in a marginalized group talks to a recorded image of themselves, Greenwood writes, it empowers the individual to open the door to the understanding and celebration that he, she, it can be deliberate. It is an interaction with a fragmented self. By fragmented, I mean a cohesive identity that's constructed from different, often conflicting parts of society, culture, and life that we relate to, because popular culture has no whole identity to offer its audience other than one that resembles the ruling class. We can come out and then come out again. We can rearrange our world how we want it. The legacy of all this plasticity, of course, reaches back to why we're gathered this weekend together, and that is Yoko Ono and the Plastic Ono Band. Even before Yoko Ono and John Lennon asked us to give peace a chance, the concept for the Plastic Ono Band emerged after Yoko expressed her wish to fabricate a robot band for an art installation in Berlin in 1967. I thought it would be great to do a show where on the stage there would be a band, she explained. But instead of each member of the band being a human being, there would be plastic boxes with a mechanism or robot inside that could perform or play an instrument or a tape recording. A year later, she shared this vision with John, and he fashioned a model out of found objects. A cassette box, a paperweight, the tube from a record-cleaning cylinder brush. And he suggested the name Plastic Ono Band. Most of us know the broad brushstrokes of what happened after this playful manufacture. Leading up to the London launch party for their first single, Give Peace a Chance, Yoko and John were hospitalized after a car crash in Scotland. Yet the Plastic Ono Band were still able to appear at the premiere party in Chelsea Town Hall the night of July 3rd, 1969, as planned. The automated players performed Give Peace a Chance as cameras pointed outwards to project the viewers onto the stage, showing themselves that they were the members of the Plastic Ono Band. As John explained in an interview, we made the band. It was physically plastic, transparent, like ghosts, a completely robot pop group. Plastic things with tape recorders in them. It played tapes and records like a giant jukebox. It even had a television. What does this description of a giant autoplay jukebox with a TV and ghost players call immediately to mind? Even though the first karaoke machines weren't technically created until Daisuke Inoue fashioned the 8-juke in Osaka in 1972, this participatory machine, transparent, reflective, churning out an invitation to add your voice to what was already a collective chorus, planted the seed for the karaoke machine's becoming. Inoue, too, created the karaoke machine in a human band's absence after a pesky request from a businessman for his bar band to perform at a corporate retreat on a resort island. From that absence came a possibility. And so it was also with the Plastic Ono Band. We, too, can be part of the most imaginative supergroup, as Yoko reminds us, which truly exists only in the mind. You're in it, she writes. Everybody's in the Plastic Ono Band. We are all members of the conceptual utopia, she notes on an open postcard from 1970. This utopia's belief system is centered on the idea that the message is the music. We convey that message. We communicate it, as this card in Yoko's own hand declares, through our performance. The ideas in this manifesto crystallized in the slogan, "You are the Plastic Ono Band." Everyone, anyone can shape its contours, can melt, remix, and let it harden again. And so we begin to understand what plasticity can mean. It is the capacity for being molded or altered, and yet it also resists. Or more precisely, as the OED clarifies, it has the ability to retain a shape despite pressure deformation. In a separate reflection on the world and the artist at the Cannes Film Festival in 1971, Ono rethinks the terms of revolution and the romantic, with a capital R, fantasies centered on the artist's role in it. How do the artist's own plastic methods retain a shape despite pressure deformation? Or are they a source of the pressure that deforms, reforms? Ono's target in her Cannes presentation is the narcissism of the so-called artist who takes the big payday and absorbs all the applause, who casts their work as something scarce and proprietary when, as she points out, creativity is abundant and we already exist in a state of creative plenitude. Artists must not create more objects, she reminds us. The world is full of everything it needs. I would add to this scenario the critic or scholar who drafts and grifts on a similarly construed revolutionary energy while making it their business to choke off the conduits of abundance for others. As you see in the complete excerpt of this quote, the plenitude Ono imagines isn't rooted in the Pollyanna-ish belief that the universe simply provides. Rather, the resources themselves have been misallocated and misappropriated into a tight circle of private, cronyistic transactions that serve the few instead of the many. The job of the artist is to change the value of things, Ono reminds us, a kind of transmutation that is simultaneously performed in her reflection on the world and the artist's role in it. For example, Ono describes a man who circulates small quantities of counterfeit 1,000-yen notes, not to flood the system with chaos, but rather to play a subtle game that both induces and exposes a propensity for policing, even among the many artists and critics who try and conceal their carceral sensibilities or mask their own grabbiness and greed. The fake 1,000-yen notes provide a microcosm of the topsy-turvy economies unleashed by plastic revaluation. Plastic revolution. Plastic rearranges the world for better or worse in an atomized musical and performance landscape ruled by no sound in particular. And though we think plastic is the thing that contains us, poisons us, suffocates us, enslaves us to debt, it can sometimes set us free when we let ourselves listen. The counterfeit, the copy, the karaoke cover, the throng of voices in sing-along choruses are all a part of an apparatus towards total freedom for everybody. A total freedom echoed to us in the Plastic Ono Band's manifesto that I shared earlier. Total communication equals peace. What makes communication total? It feels so strange to be talking to you about this from nearly 10,000 miles away through if not total communication. A remote intimacy made possible by 1.4 million kilometers, or 870,000 miles, of subaquatic cables fashioned of plastic fibers, interwoven with other synthetics and more elemental material like copper, as Lisa Parks taught us about our media infrastructures. These connections are always at risk of being severed, frayed, gnawed through by sharks, literally. T. Wynn, a graduate student I taught in American Studies at Yale this year, wrote about the sharks who disconnect lovers' discourses by chewing through submarine cables. The ocean bed is where the fiber optic cables were, she writes. Some of the cables were bitten open, revealing strands of thin hair, which made her wonder if the inventor of the internet could have been a sapphic, as making hair the main infrastructure of communication seems to be their best expertise. Wynn scored this speculative scene of communication, or a lack thereof, to Tegan and Sarah's Call It Off. But this scene made me listen again to Ono's EOS, or AOS, from her side of the self-titled Plastic Ono Band album, which you're hearing now under my words. Ono biographer Madeline Baccaro, in her book In Your Mind, The Infinite Universe of Yoko Ono, explains that the title for Yoko's experimental jazz collaboration with Ornette Coleman is a multilingual portmanteau, combining the Japanese word eo, meaning blues, and os, or os, from the English chaos. In another metonymic slide, EOS, or AOS, helps us reframe the Plastic Ono Band's work in what Kara Keeling describes as a queer and trans OS, drawing upon Tara McPherson's work on operating systems to bring the phenomenology of gendered, sexual, and racial difference into resonance with information technologies. Can telecommunication, or a deeper understanding of how what we say winds its way through plastic instead of relying on an inchoate sense of its magic, equal the total communication that eventually yields peace? Yoko Ono's vocals in EOS and other tracks on the eponymous Plastic Ono Band album were inspired by the primal scream therapy she and John were undergoing at the time, a confrontation with and purging of trauma that inches towards that total communication that becomes the condition for peace in several of her writings regarding the Plastic Ono Band. The voices of the Plastic Ono Band are plural, but not, at least in the earlier recordings, synthetic in that chemical sense. They are synthetic in a logical sense. That is, they bring together musicality, historicity, raw feeling, and the trauma that precedes peace. As music critic Marissa LaRusso describes Ono's voice, and as you heard in EOS, it is a powerful instrument. It ricochets with pre-punk raw aggression and incorporates hetai, a vocal style from Japanese kabuki theater. The Plastic Ono Band doesn't anticipate the cyborg or even the singularity of Star Trek's Borg or one shared mind, but instead acts as a system of filtration forged of multiple minds and voices who might create the conditions for another world. To revisit Ono's manifesto, the mind is what we share, like sunshine and water. What we can do is to keep it running, flowing, and keep it clean drinkable. I want to dwell for a moment on this description of the clean drinkable, of a filtration process made of eddies and flows without the still water of a singular idea or a singular person. Now that we are cheek by jowl with the end of the world as we know it, we are surfeit of plastic in all of its non-biodegradable forms, to the extent that we can't even filter out its microtude. Take, for instance, the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which, contrary to popular belief and images such as this, is not actually a floating island of garbage more than twice the size of Texas, but more like a slurry of marine debris, fishing nets, and microplastics trapped in a Pacific vortex between coasts and archipelagos, like the kind of microplastics we ingest every day without so much as giving it another thought. As the media scholar Heather Davis writes in Plastic Matter, plastic permeates every and all aspects of life on Earth, often without the consent of those people and other beings who are most affected by it. Davis demonstrates both aesthetically and materially how the synthetic cannot be disentangled from the natural, much as we hear it at work in the Plastic Ono Band, from the level of vocality to the modalities of performance. In Davis's analysis of plastic, the enmeshment of the synthetic and the natural in this age of the molecular ubiquity of petroleum creates what she calls a generalized toxicity that is also, in her words, producing queer realities. Queer realities are never entirely utopian or dystopian. It's a simple point, but the utopian doesn't really exist without dystopian conditions of the present or the past. This is not to fetishize the emergence of the utopian amidst an onslaught of ecological and political collapses, but to understand how strange configurations, habitations, and ecosystems emerge. We see plastic in its most awful forms, for example, occasioning new life, habitats, and economies. Something the Asian American literary scholar Emily Yoon also explores in her forthcoming book, Thinking Through Garbage, Living with Climate Degradation. In the hellscape of our recently anointed plastosphere, the term new life in plastic garbage has emerged to describe habitats of coastal species and marine organisms that have sprung to life across the garbage patches of the Pacific. In 2018 and 19, Lindsay Harum and her team from the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center found that coastal plants and animals have found a new way to survive in the open ocean by colonizing plastic pollution. Dozens of species of coastal invertebrate organisms have not only been able to survive, but also to reproduce, as her study published in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution reveals. Harum points out that, quote, this is creating opportunities for coastal species biogeography to greatly expand beyond what we previously thought was possible. Quite a large percentage of the diversity that we found were coastal species, and not the native pelagic open ocean species that we were largely expecting to find. Harum does add, however, that on 2/3 of the debris, we found both open ocean and coastal communities together, competing for space, but very likely interacting in other ways. But before we get carried away by the paradigm shift of a new open ocean community thriving unexpectedly on plastic trash and building little plastic castles, we should also understand, as marine biologist Sabine Reck reminds us, that these scenes of survival also increase the risk of species becoming invasive in ways that could fundamentally alter existing open ocean communities. It's a bit scary, Rex says, even as she describes our relatively recent encounter with these new ecosystems as a little revolution. Knowing that beings from elsewhere, from distant terrestrial habitats, can make it out at sea if they just have something durable to latch onto is an alluring scene of survival, especially in our turbulent times of ecocide and genocide. But as environmental groups like Earth Day Watch reminds us, this isn't a sign of nature's resilience. It's a distress signal. Even as I'm buoyed by the double fantasy of plastic's capacity to nurture life in scenes of death and ruin, I also know that it means species, including our own, are in grave danger of not being able to sustain life in our endemic habitats because of plastic. Where this leaves us in the counterfeit economies made possible by the Plastic Ono Band and Yoko Ono herself is in a tight embrace with ambivalence. An ambivalence about the plastic between us and within us. The plastic that is, for better and worse, the matter of our lives. I offer no solution or hope, just the understanding made possible by the Plastic Ono Band that we are better as many, that we are better communicating instead of withholding, that we are together and we are recharging for peace that comes next.